Fatherly advice, neighborly advice, expert advice. We often seek out advice from others at significant transformative moments in our lives. For most, these involve major health issues for ourselves or for our loved ones. Over the past 27 years, I have talked to far too many parents who are living with the lifelong medical concerns or grieving the loss of a child, in most cases due to a foodborne illness such as E. coli or salmonella. In many cases, these are children under the age of 5. Some common elements from these calls involve shock and anger, and unfortunately, self-doubt in terms of moving forward. I recall a call with one father in which he expressed his extreme feeling of guilt over not having been able to save his daughter who died due to E. coli. He also shared that he didn't feel that he could be a father for their surviving 2-year-old. In many cases, parents want to point blame and demand change, ultimately holding someone accountable, being fired, or even being sentenced to jail time. Many of these calls involve elements of PTSD, and I also find that many families, many parents talk about not being able to discuss their feelings or their needs with friends, with families, or with peers at work. I don't look forward to these conversations, but someone needs to be there as a resource for parents in this situation. My goal is to listen and to offer my insight and my experience. In 1993, my 16-month-old son, Riley, became ill from E. coli tied to contaminated meat at a fast food restaurant. Most fathers recall their kids' first steps in most words. My recollections include when my son mistook an IV bag for a baby bottle, seeing my son being airlifted in a helicopter to Children's Hospital, having a hard time seeing his little boy body as it was dwarfed by tubes and wires and monitors, and finally seeing him again outside the hospital when he was carried away in the world's smallest white coffin. I have lived more than half of my life in the shadow of those events in 1993. The future I imagined for him was taken away. My future and my identity were derailed by something I had only learned about on my son's deathbed. Before this incident, I thought about how I spent so many months and weeks out at sea on a Navy submarine, but I had made promises of making the world a better place for him and that I would have the rest of my life to make up that missing time. Unfortunately, I took those promises for granted. In the aftermath of my son's death, I felt compelled to speak up to help prevent others from living with a chair forever empty at the family table. I felt that the only way to build a future as an advocate was to master more skills and further educate myself. Adding to my background, I earned degrees in history and education and even law and policy. One of the early things I learned was that the world first took significant notice of the unseen dangers on their dinner plates with the publishing of Upton Sinclair's 1906 novel, The Jungle. And while the book is important, and I highly recommend you read it, what people don't often know about is that the London Daily Times did a literary review later that year, and there's an excerpt from that London Daily Times literary supplement that talked about the book and said something incredible, and I think it has a lot of meaning for us today. Unhappily, we have good reason for believing it all to be fact, not fiction. It is with nothing less than horror that we learn it to be true. The things described by Mr. Sinclair happened yesterday, are happening today, and will happen tomorrow and the next day until some Hercules comes to cleanse the filthy stable. The need to improve food safety took top priority in 1993. At the time, President Clinton pressured the USDA to add inspectors and improve policies. But these changes, the most significant since 1906 with the Roosevelt administration in their reaction to the jungle, failures in food safety have still persisted. Over the last 27 years, we consumers have been overwhelmed with evidence of the seemingly uninterrupted cycle of crisis and reform. The CDC estimates that each year, 48 million Americans become ill, 128,000 are hospitalized, and 3,000 die due to foodborne illnesses, most of which could have been prevented. Since Riley's death in that landmark 1993 E. coli outbreak, some 80,000 American consumers have died from foodborne illness. The frequency and quantity of food recalls, along with the number of outbreaks, illnesses, and deaths tied to foodborne pathogens indicate that problems still exist somewhere between the farm and the table. Under President Obama's administration, Congress passed the most significant Food Safety Modernization Act for the FDA. However, these advances have not prevented some of the largest outbreaks in recent history, such as those related to romaine lettuce in 2018 and 2019. I have seen many positive changes as food safety regulations have gone through significant modernization, along with new technologies and industry leaders, as they began to embrace food safety culture. But the reality is that Hercules does not really exist. But collaboratively, and with the use of new technologies, we can muster the Herculean effort, the enormous amount of work, strength, and courage that is needed to prevent failures in food safety, prevent consumers from becoming harmed, and prevent families from losing loved ones to foodborne pathogens. Today, the same companies that avoided me 25 years ago now ask me to partake in activities, trainings, events, conferences for their employees. But the message I send today is no longer solely about the past. Focusing on the past, I kind of got mad in terms of how I took for granted making the world a better place for my son and using the rest of my life to make up for lost time. I was afraid to reach to the future. However, by shifting my focus to the future, I have found peace and function, dedication and action. Today, my audiences include industry experts, leaders, quality assurance, frontline workers, lawyers, journalists, so many different people that have some role to play within the food system. I'm proud to have testified before Congress, to have served as an advisor to the USDA, to have worked with FDA leaders, and to have sat on multiple stakeholder committees and even provided leadership in terms of policy for advocacy groups. Some of the hardest conversations I've had, in retrospect, have been with other parents who later went through what my family experienced long ago. Sometimes, I talk with parents of children who were hospitalized but fortunately did not die. Though their young children lived through dialysis and surgeries and rehabilitation, many will live with lifelong medical conditions. These families also live with fears. About a decade after my son died, I met the family of a 4-year-old who was sick from E. coli. While this meeting left me with a sense of optimism because he survived, a return visit a few years later left me with something far more important. I happened to be in the town where they lived, and I was able to meet up with the mother of this child. We sat down for coffee. We talked about his progress. She shared how her son cannot use his left arm and how he often talks about how he cannot play like the other boys in his school. She took this opportunity to share with me a crayon-colored image for me to see. Essentially, she was explaining how her son was talking about if someone had prevented him from becoming sick, that person would have been his hero. He did not draw someone in a fancy business suit or in a food industry smock, no hairnet, no gloves. Instead, he drew a superhero, flying and wearing red tights and a cape. Since that visit, I have shown an image of this picture to audiences across the country and abroad. You see, it's one thing to make our food supply system as safe as can be. It's another to inspire others to do the same. Using that crayon drawing of a superhero in flight, I use it to reach out to each and every person in my audience to remind them of their role in this Herculean effort, that in the eyes of those who depend on them to make their food safe, they are seen as real superheroes, even in this world of DC and Marvel movies. Their work, their actions are critical when it comes to the future for the lives of so many. There will never be an end to pathogens in food, but together we could forge a different future with a stronger food safety culture. So, what advice do I give grieving parents who ask me how they can start looking towards the future? First, focusing energy solely on the failures of the past is neither healthy nor sustainable. Second, supporting and inspiring those who do act to prevent future failures can bring about immeasurable rewards. Our world needs your voice and your passion to help inspire the changes we all need. This is exactly the kind of work, strength, and courage behind any Herculean effort. Mine has been to create a future where fewer families live with a chair forever empty at the dinner table. I lost my son, yes, but my son did not lose his father. By supporting and inspiring the current and future generations of food safety heroes, I find incredible fulfillment. But more importantly, I also find peace in those opportunities to still be a father to my son.